sessions and sort of complain, you know, this is a race condition, we got to do something about it. Haven't really focused on it. Here's the thing. People are interested in seeing Manila run in like an active, high availability mode, and you know, we have testability problems. There's a bunch of things that will never work as long as we leave the race conditions in the code. So, given that Ocata is a short release, given the likelihood of big features landing is pretty low, I say let's work on fixing these long-standing bugs. The race conditions are the biggest ones. The basic problem is we don't do locking around state transitions. So if you look at code, I'm not presenting stuff you want. Or you can just join the WebEx. WebEx will never work. Oh, give me a break. All right, yeah, I wanted to share some examples. I was just going through various parts of the code. So where was it? I want to be very concrete about the types of problems that I think we can fix. But I did not bookmark any of these. The host is a weak sharing instance. Okay, this code right here. Here's a check for what state it's in. Has to be available, error, or inactive. It is not one of those states. The delete instance call will fail. And then down here, we update it to the deleting status. So obviously, if two threads execute this check at the same time, and then they both execute this check, you'll have two threads trying to delete the same share instance at the same time, and something bad is bound to happen. And this is everywhere in our code. So in this specific case, you could say, well, the probability is pretty small. There are other cases where it's worse. But I think that what we need to do is any type of test and set type of operation that's happening here, because we wrap the lock. At the very least, a file lock so that we get coverage across the whole host that Manila is running on. When we get to the whole active thing, we want it to be some sort of distributed lock. But that should be an easy switch to flip, right? The key is to get the locks here. It doesn't matter how many distributed locks it doesn't matter if we add Tues support or any other kind of distributed locking support to Manila. If there's no lock here, it won't do any good. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is anytime we do a test and set of this kind, it has to wrap up the lock. And we need to make sure that we don't do anything else while holding those locks. So there are other places in the code, like what was it? I think it was in the delete snapshot path. Or okay, here. So here's an example. When you delete the share, the very first thing it does is it checks the share status. And if the share status is not available, error inactive, it fails immediately. But then it doesn't update anything. It goes on and does all this other logic, looks at snapshots, CG stuff. And it's only when it gets down here to delete instance, it checks the status again and then updates it. So we would not want to hold a lock across that entire section, right? Or if there's a check that needs to be done up here, it should be followed by some sort of an update.
So specifically, we should use a database update that provides exclusion without the lock, After you.
I haven't gotten there yet. I want to talk about that next.
But how do you achieve that? How do you achieve not doing anything?
Well, so in this case, it would be sufficient just to hold a lock around the check.
Right.
And then it sort of give you an early failure. But you'd have to understand that because there's no update of database state after this check, that two threads could both get past this check and be down in the lower checks, and that nothing will actually fail until they get down in the lead instance check, unless there's some other update in check that is held, that is done atomically while a lock is held.
So basically, it's explicit also things like we mentioned that we put a lot on like this. But what I think it's really needed that we have where we are sure that kind of fix or fix. Because locking can be quite quick, because the live can be tricky.
Yes. So that's why I wanted to dedicate a whole session to this, so we can go through all the nitty-gritty details. So the point I was trying to make is, for one, we need locks around these test and set operations. Number two, don't do anything else while holding a lock, right? Because the moment you start to hold locks across lots of function calls, there's a possibility that those function calls will themselves try to grab locks, and that you can quickly create deadlock situations. So you can be very cognizant. Every time you take a lock, make sure that everything that you do is not going to block and isn't going to take any other locks. If we can ensure that, there's no deadlock issues at all. So that should be the goal. Now, there may be cases where it's not possible, and we actually have to take multiple locks, and in that case, we have to ensure what order we take them in. And the other thing I really want to avoid is any situation where you do like an RPC call or a REST call or some sort of a driver call while holding a lock, because those take unbounded amounts of time, and we'll quickly start to run into scalability problems, performance problems, if we don't minimize the time we hold locks. So that's what I was trying to say here. Locks should be held briefly for milliseconds, long enough to go to the database and back. And as we go through the code and identify the places where the locks need to go, if people start seeing cases where this is not possible or not likely, let's have discussions about this. I haven't personally gone through everywhere to find these, but I want to dedicate a lot of time and thought to discovering that. So, and then the other thing I wanted to discuss during this session was new states. So, when you take a snapshot of share, you don't update the state, right? So let me go find the snapshot create code here.
State of share. State of share.
Right. So as you can see, here's create snapshot. It does a check to make sure it's available, and if it's not available, it will fail. But if it is, it just starts creating a snapshot. So what could happen is, this call could race with the call to delete the share itself. You'll be in the middle of creating the snapshot. The delete call will also see the share is available, so I can delete it. And the deletion can complete before the create snapshot actually even starts happening. And then that create snapshot call will eventually fail with some weird error message when we could have caught it immediately and just said, you know what, you can't create a snapshot because we're deleting the share. Or we could have prevented the deletion and said, okay, you know, someone's taking a snapshot of this, you can't delete it yet until you delete the snapshot first.
If I'm not mistaken, the share has a check, share has a snapshot, and it is not allowed to.
It looks to see if there's a row in the table? But see, you can get past this check before you put any rows in the table.
Yeah, so one solution is sharding, the other solution would be the snapshot create the lock, which maybe Mark.
But yeah, so you could have a critical section that did a state check, and if it was available, then it created the database row before releasing the lock. But we have all kinds of other logic before we create that row. So it's way better to just have another database state, and this is going to come up, I suspect, in other places as well. So The Cinder team had a discussion about this a while ago. I don't know if anyone from Cinder has turned up. They were calling this, you know, microstates, or I don't know, more transitional states. There's a downside, because every time you add one of these states, it's another database transaction that has to happen. It's going to slow everything down. So we have to be careful. But in situations like this, I think it's necessary for avoiding weird errors, and possibly even required for correctness. So I think like the addition of a snapshotting state is necessary at a minimum. And I think there's going to be other states related to like replicated shares, replicated snapshots, so that when you're sort of halfway through the process of creating a new thing, it's reflected in the database, so that if someone tries to do something else, we stop it. For example, creating a snapshotting state would prevent you from taking two snapshots at exactly the same time. Which, if you think about it, is desirable, right? What's the point of having two snapshots at the same point in time? I'm going to at least wait until one finishes before starting the next one. I think that's true. Replicated snapshots. You know, Gotham, you and I have talked about this before the summit. Is there anything I'm missing related to replication?
That's the key with it. Yeah. Space that market.
And other locks around?
They're in box right now.
All right, so that's something we should talk about. So I think in the past, there was an attempt to avoid adding locks to the API layer, and I honestly don't know why.
So we were getting past the API layer, setting the first share mark. We wanted all the locks, both the teams and the share mark. I stated all your critical sections to find this. That you could, you know, see.
Was that because we weren't using file locks initially and it was processed?
We were using file locks.
But then why does it matter if they're all in the same processor?
Because we were looking at these locks over critical sections that actually ask other blocks. And so if you were to say, hey, go to the driver, ask the driver, while the driver would block any other call,
Okay.
Then it comes back. When it comes back, you do another station.
Right.
To allow that operation on.
So that's the other thing we need to talk about is removing those kinds of blocks and replacing them with actual state transitions, because we want to avoid a situation where you have implicit state stored in a thread that is executing inside Manila share that would get lost if you did a kill dash out of that process, right? We have that all over the place right now, and it will never completely go away. You're always going to have some amount of implicit state, but the more that we can explicitly put in the database, the better chance we have of being able to, you know, kill a Manila process and start another Manila process and get back to a reasonable place without having an admin need to go clean stuff up.
So if we put more transitional states in the database, there's more that we need to look at when we kill Manila and restart it from things that were in snapshotting.
There's two separate issues. One is just to get the state out of, you know, implicit state that's just in memory and get it into the database. You don't have to do anything about cleanup initially. But then once the state is in the database, then you have a hope where upon startup you could go look and say, oh, this shares in the snapshotting state, and I'm responsible for that snapshot.
And then just starting off.
And I'm just waking up, so clearly something went wrong, and I either need to go finish taking that snapshot or put it back into an available state because the snapshot, or into an error snapshotting state. You know, how you clean up is TBD, but having the state there at least gives you a hope of doing something. Oh yeah. So that's a discussion for the HA. we can, I mean, we can start getting into that. In any kind of situation where you have multiple vanilla processes managing the same backend, there's lots of bad things that happen. Like the update share stats can execute on both backends and compute the exact same information and send it to the scheduler twice as often, or 3 times as often, or 4 times as often. These backends are running. That's not a desirable behavior. The same problem would exist on startup. If every process assumed that it was responsible for cleaning up any messes, then you would have multiple processes racing against each other to clean up the same messes and create even bigger messes. So you have to have some sort of a leader election process in those situations where one of the vanilla share processes says, I'm going to do the cleanups, or I'm going to do the compute share stats, and nobody else needs to do it because I've got it covered. And then if that guy ever dies, a new leader has to get elected to go. So that's another thing that we would hope to get out of our Tues backend. It's the only reasonable way to have multi-active backends running at the same time is for one of them to decide to be the leader. This comes up with the things I mentioned. Also, the replication updating. Certainly don't want to do that twice as often because that's already pretty expensive. In fact, what you would like to do in those situations is actually spread the load around. So maybe not even have one process elect itself the leader to do all of the replication updates, but for the replication updates to be assigned to the different backends, spread that load around. I think all of those things need to be done before we can get to a place where we have active HA. We need to be able to prevent different backends from doing the same work. So we can talk about that when that session is. Well, that's this afternoon. But getting back to locks in the API service. I still don't see a good reason not to do it. The only reason I could think of is if we were not using file locks. And there was some
I think one of the motivations is that a number of us distribute multiple, run API service distributed data.
Oh, okay. So if you're in a halfway HA mode where you have multiple APIs and only one share manager per backend.
For instance, in the Centerbase, where a lot of the model was, the races in the API per se were not thought to be as serious as in the volume service in terms of potential for data corruption. Right. It might lead to a poor user experience, et cetera. But we didn't have a lot of cases, or they weren't thought significant, like the classic access rule case here, where if you had a race in the API, it caused a problem in the corresponding share volume service. Yes. So they were thought to be not harmless races, but not terribly harmful, not terribly high risk. Yeah, so the thought was we could keep, if we kept file locks out of the API service and solved them eventually with test and set atomic stuff on the database, we could live longer before a mature Tues implementation came in place. Right. So that was a motivation.
And Blair brought this up about the race between share delete and snapshot create. If in fact you do have one of those races, you won't get corrupted data. You'll just get a weird error somewhere.
Right. It's not that they're not problems, but they're a class problem. Yeah. And we haven't seen. There has been work on Tues. It's been quiet, but we haven't seen enough cross-project initiative on the Tues solutions for backends, how to and understanding of how to deploy in the case of partitions and network failures. And it's easy to say Tues will just solve everything. If we have a DLM, it'll take care of things. But it actually turns out to be pretty complicated to figure out how to actually deploy it in a real distribution and do it reliably.
So let's assume a nightmare scenario. Tues doesn't work, and for the rest of Ocata. So it's a complete piece of crap. We can't use it.
For all of Ocata, that's not that unlikely. Ocata's free, so I mean.
No, I'm saying, let's assume that Tues doesn't even work right now, right? Because we know that at least some backends work pretty well for Tues. Or is that?
We know theoretically, at least, that if you use Zookeeper, it's all cool. I don't know if we know of a real-life, large-scale deployment with OpenStack in which Tues is working to supply. I mean, this is our next topic, but I mean,
yeah, we need to have this discussion. But what I'm saying is, if you assume the nightmare scenario that the Tues doesn't work and that we have no DLM, but we start introducing locks into the API service, how much of a step backwards is that?
yeah, I mean that's a concern.
Because now it means that you can't run multiple API services on different nodes.
It's a motivator for perhaps having two kinds of exclusion, you know, or I mean, using a test and set type exclusion. I'm not arguing that that's what we should do, but I'm describing the dynamic. One of the reasons people want to do that is they say, oh yeah, this ING type state idea is great. You know, we need to handle API races. We're going to use ING states when we need to.
Yeah.
And if we can do exclusion around those without having to introduce all the machinery of a DLM, that may get us through a few releases, you know, and it may be an elegant solution for that.
See, that's not something for ING, because the lock will be lower.
Yeah, I mean, then you can't.
No, is that a test and set isn't local because it's on the database. So if you can control.
Yeah, are you familiar with all the work Gorka has done on Cinder with the database test and set magic?
But that's not local. That's effectively a DLM around the database.
Yeah,
The microstates would get you the long ones down that road.
If you do the updates using test and set on the database, which we're not proposing, I'm not proposing.
Right.
Because,
I mean, there are downsides to that.
Because that code has its own complexity and its own limitations that I was hoping not to take on. If we could just, you know, invoke blocks and solve all of our problems.
Right. So it's easier to say and more elegant. We're going to use one solution.
Yeah.
It's file locks or distributed locks, and somebody's going to supply us some magic DLM that's going to handle them.
What if the fallback is, I mean, file lock can be distributed if you use NFS.
If you use shared storage as a solution.
Is that going to kill anybody to do that? I mean, I don't know how many people are already trying to deploy Manila with multiple API services in an active-active configuration and expecting correct behavior.
Well, all of our customers won't. Our standard deployment is like three controller. You know, the classic deployment is you have three controllers running the API service or sender side.
So how hard would it be to get NFS locking between those multiple servers?
Well,
I think that this is something.
it's not that it's not practical. It's that only some of our customers would do that.
Okay. Well, I want to understand this because we don't want to create a situation where you get step backwards.
Not all of our customers even running like that in their clouds.
So how would we avoid?
I mean, if I were a customer deploying, I could say, yeah, okay, that sounds like a good idea. That, you know, I'm going to run shared storage with file locks. That sounds like a good design. That's not something, you know, we're at least in a position to require our customers to do.
But it's a deployment concern. It's a deployment tooling issue, right? Because the tool that does the deployment has to set this up or not set it up, right? At the end of the day.
And it needs to do the failover for NFS.
Wait, what do you mean?
We have just a single NFS server, and it fails for some reason, and the logs don't work.
So you introduce a new central point of failure by...
And I don't think at least that it's any better situation that you are holding log and you think you have exclusive access to the object while your two other API servers are thinking exactly the same and behaving like they have exclusive access.
Well, no,
It's actually better to realize, like, hey, we don't know if there might be a race condition and play by that rather than thinking that we have a lot.
What are your concerns with the test set? So one of the things was saying that for the area and limit get on the also as far as controls, the best sense. I don't see anyone else adding any for the area
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of concerns there. I'm describing the kind of from both sides here, within on the conversation. One is that it's not straightforward, easy code to write. So you end up having a few, in Cinder we see some people shying away from it and saying, oh well.
It's not just like initiating a transaction.
Right. Now, that's not to say it couldn't be. There are efforts to make it simpler, more straightforward, and to have better cross-training on it. But that's a consideration. The other big consideration for Manila right now is there's no solution for multi-table updates. So if they're only around around ING transitions on a single table, that's not a particular consideration. But if it's it's not a general solution because of instances, share instances and stuff like that. Manila has a much more complicated, arguably maybe better schema than Cinder underneath. But
no, we have a pretty complicated schema with the instances tables.
That's kind of what. So I don't know to what extent that could be mitigated.
So something like this kind of. Wait a minute. Sorry. This is a perfect example of where a test and set would be the kind of thing you want to do, right? Looking at the state, if it's one of the valid states, then we want to update it. If it's not, we want to not update it and throw it in.
Right.
And so if there was a way to get a test and set primitive that would just handle this case, it would be looking at it. But it's important to note that what the Cinder guys are doing is way more complicated than that. Because Orca designed a system that it will work without database transactions. It work even if you have a cluster database with something like Galera, which offers kind of odd consistency guarantees about your data. It works by modifying the schema itself, and you have to every time you do an update to a table, you also have to update like an extra column. And all of that magic is hidden down inside a layer that the Orca created in Cinder. And I looked at what it would take to port that layer over to Manila, and the problem is it's tied up. So Cinder's already a long ways down the path of doing Oslo versioned objects. So all of that magic is hidden inside the Oslo versioned object thing. We don't have Oslo versioned objects, and we may never at the rate we're going. So it would be a huge amount of effort to port all that code over. If we decided we wanted Oslo version objects and we could get that work done relatively quickly, then it might be easier just to say, oh, maybe we can also grab this cool test and set logic. But it has the limitation Tom mentioned. You can test multiple fields in multiple columns and multiple tables, but you can only update one table in one of these test and set transactions. And we know that in Manila, there's places where we have to update more than one table.
Yeah, do we have that? We have that not just in the share service, but also on the API, that requirement?
Well, I'm not
the multi-table requirement.
I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just, I'm thinking an outcome really ought to be that we have a spec about locking, or about, and when I call it locking, I mean,
I want to take
in a very
for this feature.
Yeah, the very generic sense of that word at the moment when I say locking.
No,
different ways to achieve exclusion.
The session is called race conditions, right?
Yeah.
There's lots of ways to address race conditions. Right. Just saying that we're aware that race conditions exist and we have code around that is not acceptable. Because at some point you need a solution, right?
Right, I agree. But my worry with the using file locks you know, saying that we want, moving from, okay. Your initial description, I think, is great. And what I worry about is saying, well, this requires that we use file locks as the mechanism. We need exclusion.
File locks are great as long as all your services are on the same node.
Right.
But we're already hearing that that's unacceptable.
And that's not true for us. I don't have, Mark, I assume with your Kubernetes multi, you know, yeah, but I mean, if, I'm just thinking of, I'm wondering to what extent we're the only odd man out here, and or to what extent what I'm describing is actually a common real-life way of deploying OpenStack.
Manila share or Manila?
No, right now, for instance, we will run multiple APIs and schedulers and only one share for backend. And you will do that on your Kubernetes-based deployment, if I can call it that.
We are doing the same.
And you will, pardon?
We're doing the same.
And you do the same, and I don't know, can you speak for
Moss.
what Moss customers do typically, or how you have to deploy with,
Most just stuff is supporting Manila.
yeah, but what do you do for sender, for example, would be an analogous situation, because in our case, it's the same model for sender, right? We're only doing one volume, we control the active passive, so we have some form of HA, but we don't run sender volume active, but we feel comfortable enough, all things considered, running the API schedule.
Let me ask this question. Is there a dial you can turn that turns it down to 1?
That one can turn? Yes. A customer could.
Okay. So if the customer said, well, I'm going to turn the dial to 1, then file locking would be acceptable in that case. So the problem is that the default is not 1, and you don't want it to be 1. You want it to be 3.
And there's a general belief that that clouds are about scaling out, and we ought to be able to run it, that we ought to be able to run, and then if we can't scale out all the API services, we shouldn't use cloud. Wow. I mean, that's kind of the perception.
Does anyone believe the API service is a problem? Not the back end? Yeah,
I think they do, and how we talked about is there empirical evidence for this and not, and so on.
I would be surprised if having a single Manila share service and having a large number of API services allowed you to get more done than with a single API service.
Yeah, I don't want to get into that. I don't want to get into arguing for that, because I don't have evidence one way or another. What I do know is that almost all the distributions are doing this. I mean, just to the customer base. So somebody's thinking that, and so it's a big general belief. It's going to be tricky. Yeah, but it's going to be tricky to convince the overall OpenStack community not to scale out API services. And Manila taking that on, you know, we wouldn't be able to convince our distro to change for Manila.
Right.
You know,
if we started implementing locking with the assumption that there was only going to be one API service, when in fact there were actually multiple API services because the way people deployed, the situation would be no worse than it is today.
I understand. I understand that.
So as a step forward, as long as there's an ultimate goal to have a DLM and to have multiple share services running too, we would be on the right track. Possibly.
Possibly. So my worry about Tues at the moment is it's a handwave. You know, it's an indirection layer that's going to solve everything for us. You know, and the hard problems is what one's going to put behind it and how one's going to deploy it, and that's going to take.
So if there's a lot of angst around Tues, what if we say to hell with Tues, we're going to use Zookeeper? That's another option that we could pursue, right? Or something other. I mean, we could pick one. We could say, you know what, Tues is untested, and who the hell knows what it is. But Zookeeper is well tested. Everyone knows that Zookeeper does what it says it does. And there's a bunch of other solutions that are in the same boat.
We haven't tested. I want to see somebody running Zookeeper, running OpenStack with Zookeeper, a real life deployment at scale where they understand what to do when their network petitions, what they do. In other words, there are deployment considerations for any of these things that are huge. And they need to be understood. And currently, what I can say right now is they're not understood by me, and I haven't found someone who does understand them, who can tell me how to do it.
You're saying if as a community we pick one of these DLMs as opposed to Tues and say, this is the one, we haven't bought ourselves anything in terms of deployer.
I don't think we bought, I think it's more than a Manila issue. And not just because of, it's an issue for Red Hat or whatever. It's a cross project. If you're going to run a DLM, it needs to work, it needs to work for Slumber, it needs to work for Sender, it needs to work for Manila, et cetera. And right now we have a hand wave.
If we all agree on the same one. You could imagine a crazy world where...
You sure can imagine a crazy world like that, and it would be horrible, right? I mean, it would be a nightmare.
But it might help forward progress. I mean, right now we're stuck arguing about what to do, and no one's doing anything, which is also not a good situation.
I don't think
so. There was one argument that the API service is not very much critical enough. I think the critical issues with rate are in the manager of the share service. So if we have here race conditions, it can be that there's interaction to the storage backend, and there we have a place to stay. In the API, which is very database, and maybe the user sees something strange, that's right, that's the issue, but we don't lose data, whatever, there's nothing really...
okay, so your proposal is put in the state transitions, don't hold locks around them in the API service, but do hold locks around state transitions in the manager.
I would focus on the share service and the logging in. Here we have the danger of doing stuff, whatever, later on.
Right. And in terms of those scale out issues, you can run multi-backends as a way of scaling out a bit more with the share service and still run back passive. And that's kind of how we recommend.
Well, it depends how granular your actual storage controller is. Like if you have lots of tiny ones that you can just stack up, you can get scaled anyway. If you're running Ceph, one giant one, it's hard to have lots of steps, right? It would never scale by having lots of back ends. So it depends on your back end.
We do the state transitions area. The suggestion is in Google and everything. We have this system as actually in the workshop and started this discussion. We could actually follow what we're currently doing and actually do the state transition.
It's a good suggestion. What I don't like about it is it seems to kick the can on what, how do we get correctness in the long run.
Right.
Is it possible to use a micro-state, actually, discussed it either, to set the proper state, micro-state in the database and the database to exclude the provisioning. I mean, the create or stack or delete or create delete, something like that.
Well, yeah, but unless you have a way of testing what the current state is and updating it atomically, doesn't matter how many states you have, you could race on one of those transitions, right?
It's just keep the exclusive status in the interface level. So, for example, if I just use the create snapshot and delete share as example. So when you delete the share, you will set the microstate in deleting, right? And you will just try to create a snapshot. You will carry state.
Right. The problem is if you're running the API service and the share service on a different node and you're only using file locks, even if you implement a lock, the two transitions can still race.
No lock that is have because we just have the same class as status.
You just narrow the window.
Exactly. That's the problem is two threads can be executing in parallel. They can both query the state. They can both say, yeah, the state's available. And they can both update the state, and whichever one happens second, win. And they'll both proceed, assuming that they won that race, when in fact only the second one did.
That's true, we have a mechanism in the database that exclude.
No. I mean, Cinder does. We don't. We could try to do what Cinder is doing for these simple state transitions.
I went off on this just because you said you weren't sure why people wanted to avoid locks in the API area.
No, this is new information.
That's a motivation.
Yeah.
That's a motivator.
So absolutely, we should investigate, and I have investigated it, and I didn't like it, but we should investigate more. What if we did some limited form of a testing set just for state transitions in the shares table and snapshots table and the shared instances table and all those things? Maybe we could do some limited form of it that would get us atomic state transitions. Then you could use state transitions to lock out longer types of operations.
Yeah, wouldn't get you 100%. So you're still going to need probably a DLM eventually, but if you're running,
right. So
if you're willing to run the share service.
So in the short run, that's a promising approach. Although it might be a lot of work for that you can do cable. Okay, I'm not going to touch it.
But if you take that kind of approach, you might want to say, well, okay, the races are not as bad in the API, the consequences are not as bad in the API. Is there anything about Manila in the API as opposed to Cinder that makes it, where there are dangerous races there, where you really are, you need some form of exclusion, so you need to prioritize kind of control.
If you take what Mark said and said, well, we should focus on getting the state transitions correct in the share manager service.
Right.
And then what you have to understand is that any state transition that you make in the API service, because we do make might get swallowed, right? Like you could transition a share from available to deleting, and then it could immediately get overwritten by another change coming from the manager service, and you'd have to code everything, understanding that
can happen.
And that would be kind of gross.
Yeah.
So it seems like you're kind of forced to do it, certainly you just not doing nothing. You kind of have to go through the file lock, what you're saying, with one step, and eventually the DLM.
Well, the file lock would solve all of our problems as long as you only had a single node deployment. What we're hearing is, in practice, nobody does that, so it's kind of waste.
Right.
Except for us developers.
DLM, so rather than boil the ocean, I guess what I'm saying, if I kind of agree, in some steps, even if it only solves for somebody better than no step.
Well, I'm tired of this argument about, well, we can't do DLMs because we can't do DLMs. It's been going on for...
Ultimately, that you can have to have it, but you can't solve this unless you...
There was a session on neutron race conditions where they said we can do Tues, but we want to be the first ones to do Tues.
I want to be the first one to do Tues. So we have a session this afternoon specifically on availability. We can have a discussion. We can get into more detail there. And we're 5 minutes past the end here, so anything else?
But I mean, I think there was agreement here.
Okay, so
if I understand it about
the other agreement I wanted to get is I will own this because it's important to me. I need volunteers to actually help, go find all of these state transitions, and audit the code, and add blocks or whatever it is that we add everywhere.
There's a catch-up in the Tues. It's sort of working, right?
Whatever we decide, what's important is adding the locks where they need to be, or the atomic state transitions if we decide the testing set is the answer. There's just a lot of places where it needs to go. A lot of new states need to get added. We didn't really discuss the implication on the REST API. If we start adding more states, the REST API will subtly change. Will that cause any heartburn for people? Will we have to microversion those changes?
Do we have a diagram about the different states and transitions between states?
No, that's one of the things that we would need to produce. So I'm saying I will help with that. I don't think I can do it on my own. So I'm looking for anyone else who's interested in getting this problem solved in the Ocata time frame who can dedicate time to it. So
So I would be interested in testing phase. So I have the idea of you use base driver. I think we have one more operation driver, whatever.
Yeah. Dummy driver.
So we could use that and let's say keep randomly for any action and concurrency testing, and we can see that they to simulate a very slow backend, and maybe this will cause a lot of friction. Let's say at least identify the tricky. So that's just one idea about how to test the distribution.
Is that practical, Larry? Sleep random? Could easily do that.
It shouldn't be that much effort. Just push the concurrency to a high level and test with that.
Well, this is going to test races within a single node.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, it's not criticism, it's an observation.
Yeah.
Yeah, you wanted to be doing things like creating snapshots and deleting shares and stuff.
Yeah, but if the backend needs time, let's say you can share your stuff and you don't have a log on that, you will.
You don't want to lock, you want to transition state.
Yes.
And then not hold the lock while the driver's doing its thing.
So I will at least get some time on that to let
Okay.
have at least a.
But from testing point of view, you can use rally framework.
Yeah, ready is one thing, or just switch concurrency to high level. Or just need to
Within level.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks, Mark. So one of the things that will come out of this is a spec with state diagrams, all the new proposed added states, all the existing transitions.
Maybe two tables, one of that we already have. And
Well, yeah, that's what I mean. All the state transitions and then all the proposed additions and changes, which I honestly don't know how many we need. It's going to take some work to find this. All right.
What did we decide about test and set versus Tues versus what decision have we made other than there's going to be a spec and what it by?
Well, we've agreed that just doing file locks by itself is not
Okay.
because it will break action.
So we talked about things we don't want to do.
But that's insufficient, right?
Well, it's insufficient for multiple nodes. Yeah.
And everyone does multiple nodes. We just heard that.
I understand that, but all of your locks can go to, right? And then in one place you can change the configuration from file locks to, then suddenly you can go from single file to.
Oh yeah, I know. I mean, the theory behind Tues, if all of that works great, this is awesome because you get exactly what you want, and you can just flip a magic switch and it's new back in.
When you use file locks.
Well, in the gate we'd run Tues. Or I'm sorry, in the gate we'd run Zookeeper. Developers could run with file locks on, they didn't want it, but I think the default we want to pick the one that we thought was best. But the important thing is that people are highly suspicious that Tues even does what it says that it does. That's the FUD that gets thrown around, is that no one has actually tried it and scaled it up and gotten it to do what it says that it does. So.
But I don't know how people, but it works, and I think not here for the long, we'll then split and see what's happening. This is very good. Or SK one, things really happen.
Yeah.
That's something that I was hoping very already.
is not using Tues for a DLM. Salamander's using Tues for group election.
This is something else we need.
Yeah, that's a good thing, but I'm just saying we don't yet have, Neutron maybe soon, I mean, but we don't yet have real world experience with people deploying failures and partitions of, negative partitions in the cloud.
You didn't mention problem. So next week, we're going to have some meetings with the boss on that.
So let's save all the two discussions for this afternoon, because we have.
Yeah, we'll
So we're